Well, here we are, April 29, 2022. It's been a cold April here in Iowa, and end of April we're going to try to put this PTO clutch back in the John Deere 60. And right now the clutch is engaged, so all these parts are locked up, and the PTO will turn. Very important that these are lined up, and I think the John Deere dealership would typically have a spare one of these drums right here that he would use to line that up before he engaged the clutch. I didn't have a spare one, so I did the best I could to line everything up and lock up the clutch. And now it's a question of inserting it into this drum, and so I've oriented the drum, or I'm going to orient it to be straight up and down, with that bottom slot right here being at the very bottom. My dad has taken a piece of plywood and attached it to the drawbar assembly, some C-clamps and whatever. We've got it right up to the bottom of the casting right there, and that thing, I'm going to guess it weighs about 40 pounds. So it's not something that you want to just try to freehand into position. It's going to be very hard to do. A couple of things while we've got this apart here. Up on top of the clutch housing of a 60, and it's probably the same for 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 series tractors, and maybe the 3 number tractors as well, the 2-cylinder ones. There's a hexagonal nut right here, and if you take it off, there's a slotted head in that stud, and you can change the position. If you can see this fork right here, this part right here will go up and touch the bottom, and you can't really see it very well, but take my word for it, that adjusting stud goes down and it bears on this part right here of this fork assembly. And so it does give you some stop point on that, and so that's how you would adjust that if you need to. Other than that, we're just going to see how well this thing goes in there. Well, so we'll take the new gasket, goes on the housing, and we'll maneuver it around and get it taped in place so that we've got it when we need it. Might have to flip it over on the other side. The other parts here are these brass clutch fork shoes, and you gotta remember to put them in place. Here. One on each side, and then it's going to be dropping that assembly onto this piece of plywood, probably pulling this fork open as far as it'll go, get those oriented, get them engaged, hopefully slide the whole assembly down into that drum. And this thing has the potential to go really good or really bad. We'll just see. And actually, after looking at the clutch housing gasket, I found that rather than putting it on that assembly, it made more sense to put it right on the tractor. There's a couple of alignment dowel pins, one there and one there, so you can hang the gasket on that. Maybe take a little tape and tape it back up high if you think you need to, or tape it down there if you think you need to. But anyway, put the gasket on the tractor seemed to make more sense. Okay, here we go. Okay, well, I turned the video off for a while because it took, oh, really only about 7 or 8 minutes probably to get it in there. But it was just a lot of fooling around, really. And one thing I would say is that that round drum that's in the tractor, what I did is orient it so that the slots were straight up and down, and then I oriented the clutch pack the same way. And then when I set it on the plywood, I kind of tilted. Well, first thing you need to do is get it close enough to engage those brass shoes in the slots in the clutch pack, and then push the whole thing forward a little bit more, and then maybe tilt it back just a little bit, enough to catch that bottom stack of driven discs into the slot in that drum. And then you could actually grab the tail shaft and just shake it back and forth a little bit, and that kind of allowed things to line up a little bit better in there. And then the whole thing slid into place. So I'm pretty happy with that. And now it's just going ahead and bolting it up with a hardware there that we took off last summer, really. So I don't think I'll show you that on the video. What I might do is show you setting up the gaskets on the, let's see, there. It's these parts here. So we'll turn the video back on a little bit maybe. So, got it bolted up. One thing you want to make sure you're running a tractor, one of these old 2-cylinder JDs, put a wrench on every nut and bolt on the tractor if you can, and tighten them all up good. That's really what was the downfall of this PTO, was these cap screws loosened up just enough to let the oil seep away through that gasket, and then it just burned up. So something about these old tractors, and I found it on the Farmall 300 that we have too, that when I started putting a wrench on every nut and bolt I could find, I found a lot of them that were loose. So tighten them up well. Now the way that you set the end play on this tail shaft, this output shaft, is through this seal retainer right here, and what you got is a steel washer there, and the way it came apart was it came apart with a paper washer, a steel washer, or steel spacer I should say, and another paper, not a washer, but a paper gasket. And you got to be the cameraman and the builder and everything. Sometimes I misspeak, but you get the idea. So I'm going to bolt this back together using a paper gasket, a steel spacer, and another paper gasket. Check my end play and see what I got. You don't want it so there's no end play, and I think the spec is like 5 thousandths on it, but as long as there's just a little wiggle in there, you're going to be okay. So I'm going to turn the camera off while I do that. So I bolted this bearing retainer casting on to the tractor housing, PTO clutch housing, using 2 paper gaskets and a steel spacer, and there's just a little bit more play there than I want, so I'm going to turn the camera off, take it back off, take one of the paper gaskets off, and see what that does. So wrapping this job up, I'm going to use typical old trans hydraulic fluid, and I'm supposed to put about 2 quarts into this hole right here until it just starts to run out, and that's about right. Go ahead and hook up the linkage to operate it. If you've got to get into the clutch to the PTO clutch to adjust it, you do that through this big plug right here. Now I think I've got that done in the assembly stage, so we're going to start the tractor up and give it a try here in a little bit. And one thing I'd say, if you're going to run one of these old JDs or One of those old Farmall 300s back there behind it. Tractor's 70 years old, but you can still buy operator's manual and shop manual for it. And if you're just going to operate the tractor, this is a great resource right here. And if you're going to work on it, this is a great resource right here. So anyway, we'll put the oil in the PTO and fire it up and see if it works. Well, this old John Deere has what they call a live PTO rather than a transmission driven PTO, which means anytime you pull this lever, your power shaft's going to rotate, as long as you've got this selector lever in that position right there. When it's over here, then it disconnects that power shaft, so you don't have to have all that stuff running all the time if you're not using the PTO. You put it over in the other position, that engages it. So we're kind of at the moment of truth now, where we're going to get on the tractor, start it up, and see what happens. That's about all I can say, I guess. Okay, here we go. Well, for now anyway, I'm going to call that success. We'll hook the bush hog up to it someday and see what it'll really do.